I always say there is no winning in divorce. There is no scoreboard, as you said, with sports. So I try to reframe it as, are we getting a great solution? I do think sometimes there is some losing in divorce. I really do. And some of that by people not knowing how to present their evidence, some of them by not having the right lawyer, sometimes, frankly, being in front of the wrong judge. But I don't think there's any true winning. This is human conflict, this is human emotion, this is human relationships. And there's no person running around keeping stats on who got what rebound or how many base hits somebody got or anything else. This is life.
Welcome to Divorce Dialogues. I'm Catherine Miller. This is where we have honest, thoughtful conversations about divorce, the emotional, financial, legal, and family questions no one prepares you for. From deciding whether to separate, to navigating the process with dignity, to rebuilding what comes next, Divorce Dialogues is here to help you find clarity, perspective, and a better way forward. Most people think divorce is about ending a marriage, but what I see over and over again is that the real challenge really isn't the ending. It's how people move through it, because divorce is one of those situations where the stakes feel incredibly high, emotionally, financially, and when there are children involved, relationally as well. And when people feel that kind of pressure, they tend to default to instinct to protect themselves, to try to control the outcome and react rather than thinking strategically. And that's often where things start to unravel. Not because the situation required it, but because the process became adversarial, reactive, and difficult to contain. So the question becomes, what would it look like to move through divorce without destroying everything in the process? Not avoiding conflict, because that's not really possible, but handling it in a way that's more thoughtful, more intentional, and ultimately more aligned with what you're trying to preserve. And that's what this conversation is really about. What does it actually take to move through the divorce without destroying everything in the process? I'm joined by Jenny Bradley, a family lawyer and mediator who has spent her career helping people navigate divorce with clarity, intention, and far less conflict than they thought possible. Through her work at Triangle Smart Divorce, Jenny focuses on out-of-court solutions, including mediation and collaborative divorce, to help families make thoughtful decisions that protect their children, their finances, and their future relationships. This is a conversation about what it actually takes to divorce differently and why the way you go through it matters just as much as the outcome. Jenny, you've built your practice around out-of-court solutions to divorce. What do you think people are getting wrong about the traditional divorce process?
I think the first thing is people's perception is a little skewed based upon what we see in the media, what we see in movies, what we see showing up in social media feeds, what we see in news articles and such, and they think that everything has to be a battle. When you're going to go through a divorce, they think it has to be a fight because we don't agree to be married anymore, so we must be in disagreement about everything. And I think that's where a lot of people start, is they start focusing on what they don't agree upon rather than the common ground and where they do agree.
And do you think that's the first mindset shift that they need to make when they get to the divorce process?
I think it's one of the first. I think the first is more what you said here in the beginning of the conversation, which is how do we become less reactionary? How do we become less instinctual? How do we move ourselves from a position of I feel attacked or I feel like I'm being punished or this person is against me now, to really we're trying to get into a resolution that works for the whole family, not just one person. That's the big mindset shift first, I think.
Well, I think that the two are really related, right? Because if you start thinking about what you don't agree on, then you go into that sort of reactive place and you think, okay, I got to fight, or I've got to flee, or I just can't do anything to fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And if you start thinking, well, there are actually a bunch of things we do agree on, right? We are in agreement that we love our kids. I might not think you love our kids as much as I do, right? And you show your love in the wrong way. But I see that you do love the kids, right? Like there's that. We have come to agree to get divorced, even if one person reluctantly does, right? No one really wants to be married to someone who doesn't want to be married to them, ultimately. So there are actually a lot of things people do agree on. So I think that can help them make that shift to trying to find a way through that isn't so reactive?
I think you're right, Catherine. I think that it's a tool to be less reactive, to start seeing what you can agree upon. Perhaps you both agree we want to be able to live in places that our children are comfortable in. We don't know exactly what that looks like yet. We don't necessarily know how we're going to afford that yet. We don't know what we might have to give up in order to be able to afford that. But we know that we want that, and we can start there. We also know, perhaps, and I don't mean to just focus on children. There's a lot of people going through divorce who don't have children. But we also know perhaps that we don't want our child feeling uncomfortable at a wedding, at a graduation, at an important event for them, whatever that may be, because they're worried about how their parents are going to be getting along because they had a nasty divorce. I think a lot of people in this day and age have seen either their parents or close friends or other folks going through divorces, some of which haven't been so great. And so maybe they can reach agreement on, we don't want our situation to look like that.
It's really interesting, and I'm going to take a little detour here because we often talk about children on the podcast, and protecting children was one of the reasons why I started the podcast and started the practice that I have. But there are a lot of people who are getting divorced who don't have children. I mean, don't have children, like not adult children. They just don't have children, which of course is fine. And I think for those people, and I had a conversation recently on the podcast about this, for those people, it can actually be harder because they don't have that something that they can agree on. I can compromise because it's best for the children, right? Like there's no something that they can agree on that allows them to try to find a resolution, and their own sort of sense of identity and being seen by the other and seen in the world feels at risk. And sometimes those can be the most high conflict cases in my experience.
I'll agree with that as a generalization. I think that it's important to try to find commonality wherever you can find it. And it is easier, I do believe, to find it with children because we don't want our children to be screwed up by our divorce. We don't want our divorce to mess them up. We don't want our children to have to go to 20 years of therapy because of what we did in our divorce, That mantra you can agree with. Also, we want the best for our children. And it is harder when you don't have commonality, but I think that a lot of people, when they move past perhaps some of the devastation or the shock or the grief or the anxiety that surrounds divorce, some of those emotions, can actually think that they want a better future. Like, I think both people can agree that they want better futures. Most people, not all high conflict personalities, of course, but most people can agree they want a better future. They want less drama. They want less conflict. And I agree with you. Some conflict is healthy and needs to be had. And some conflict is just necessarily part of the process. But they want less conflict in the future. And so starting with what we do at Trying to Smart Divorce is to get people to focus on that. What do you want your life to look like? You get to design this life. Do you want to be angry and bitter for the rest of your life? Do you want to try to move through this as fastly and as smartly as you can so that you can set yourself up for success in the future without having to have so many resentments, so much anger, so much frustration, etc.? But I agree with you, those can be some of the most difficult ones because you have to try to find that commonality. And when somebody's angry, somebody's hurt, somebody feels betrayed, somebody feels taken advantage of, whatever the feelings may be, it's hard sometimes to pull back from that and see down the road.
I really agree that it is a good idea to focus on the future and not on the past. And one of my favorite expressions is that holding on to resentment is like swallowing rat poison and hoping that the rat will die. And that doing that going forward is not healthy to you, right? And I'm just going to pause here for 1 second and think about, I think that people also don't want to feel like they've wasted the years of their marriage, right? And to feel that, yeah, all right, this marriage came to an end. It went through a process and it came to an end. And the end might feel bad, sad, yucky, angry making. There are a lot of things, a lot of what the Buddhists call afflictive emotions can happen at the end of a marriage. But that doesn't mean it was a failure. Each person can feel that, yeah, they're going through this difficult moment of transition, but the majority of the marriage actually worked in a lot of ways. And thinking through, like making a gratitude list of what this actually did for each person, I think can be really helpful and actually get them into a place of more proactivity from reactivity.
So I think that's a great thought.
So I know that you've seen both these high conflict and less high conflict, more cooperative, collaborative type divorce. And what do you think at the beginning of the process determines which path people go down? Because in New York, 97% of divorcing people settle before a judge makes a decision after a trial, and nationwide, that statistic is 95%. So people are very likely to settle, but they can settle, what was that Tina Turner song? You can do this the nice way or the hard way.
I don't know that this is the right answer, but this is my gut, right? And so I do think most people settle, not always because it's the right thing for them, but because they're just tired of fighting. I do think that some people just give up and they don't want to fight and they just want to be done and they want to move on. And that's okay. I'm not making a judgment call on that. I'm just saying that I think that is why some things settle. There is still very much, in many relationships, a power dynamic, whether that's financial or emotional or psychological. And sometimes we see folks just kind of cave, if you will. But for the most part, I think that people are beginning to understand that you get one shot at this life, at that dash that's in between when you're born and when you leave this world. And life's too short to spend a bunch of money on lawyers fighting about who's going to get the TV, who's going to get this piece of furniture, and how we're going to divide this when it's pretty simple how most assets get divided. Not all assets. I mean, small businesses, of course, a whole different kettle of fish, and, complex real estate and all other things, different. But for the most part, throughout our nation, we have 50-50 presumption that's fair, if you will. And a lot of people are understanding that they're not going to get any better than that without cooperation, right? If they go to court, that's where the judge is starting. And the judge doesn't get to know them. The judge doesn't get to know what's important to them. And I think a lot of people are finding out that that's not the right place to be, because any semblance you had of control over your divorce completely goes out the window when you go to court. Completely. It is then in the hands of the one person, in our state anyway, sitting in the black robe behind an elevated bench that's looking down upon you, listening to all the things that you have to say, or we hope listening anyway, making a decision about what they think is fair and they think is best for your children and they think is, quote, reasonable. And I don't know how that person could know your life as well as you. So I think a lot of people are now beginning to see and understand that out-of-court resolution, whether that be settlement, whether that be mediation that leads to a settlement, is just a better solution all around than something that is thrust and forced upon you by someone who's never met you.
Do you think there's a way to start in the conversation about divorce for people, or in the interview process of the divorce professionals, that would set you on a path to a more peaceful, amicable, cooperative, less stressful, less antagonistic, less adversarial process that could get people to that place in an easier, maybe faster, certainly maybe less expensive?
I'm sure this is the way in New York. It's certainly this way in North Carolina. Some of my peers don't like when I say this, but there are some people, as we would say in the South, that would go to court and try the pig for the ham sandwich, right? Like, they're just trial lawyers. They do whatever they can do to burn a bridge that they don't have to walk across tomorrow. They are aggressive. Assertive is a great thing. Aggressive sometimes can blow up in your face. And so I think when you're interviewing divorce lawyers, it is incumbent upon the person interviewing divorce lawyers to ask, what are your typical strategies? How much are you in court? Why do you go to court? What do you think about going to court? What do you think about resolving without going to court? And really digging in on those things, if you know that that's like one of your worst nightmares, is that you would turn everything over to this, judge in the black robe to decide things. I certainly have seen in my practice, I know you have as well, people come to us after they've gone to lawyers, and the lawyer really has fueled the fire more than either spouse ever did. It's totally a disservice to the client. It's totally a disservice to anyone, but frankly, the lawyer's pocketbook, I think. And I know that's not a popular thing for me to say, but litigation is costly. And there are some folks out there, I think, who go to court first because they're more worried about their income and their bottom line than what's best for their client. I hate to say it, but it's true. There's this in every industry. Lawyers are not special. There's this in every industry.
Yeah. And I think there are judges out there who would definitely agree with that summary of some members of the bar who are maybe not illustrating the best of the principles or the reasons that many of us went to law school.
I mean, I don't think really any of us went to law school to do anything other than help people solve problems. And, I did just bash on our peers a little bit. So I will say, yes, I don't think that's the majority of people doing family law. I don't think that's the majority of people where I am. That's not the majority of people I've come in contact across with the nation that do family law from some of the national groups you and I are in. But they are there. And they present really well because in an initial interview between you and your prospective client, right? These are the folks that are like, we're going to fight for you. And that's egregious that happens. And emotion sells. And so you've got to be careful as a prospective person getting divorced.
And it falls right into the kind of perception of a lawyer, right? Like that, all the lawyer jokes and all that sort of stuff as to how we lawyers are out to take advantage of people and the lowest of the low, even though it's so ironic because I really can't think of someone that I know who went to law school other than for the reason to help people and to help them in a way that they really felt in their heart. Divorce Dialogues is brought to you by Miller Law Group. We believe divorce isn't just a legal process, it's a human transition. At Miller Law Group, we help people navigate divorce with dignity, clarity, and respect, focusing on conversations that lead to better outcomes for families. Learn more at miller-law.com. I think that people have, when they're divorcing, this idea of winning. And I think that the win-lose paradigm is a false paradigm in many, many aspects, maybe not in sports, but in many aspects of human conflict. And I certainly think that it's a false paradigm when it comes to divorce. So when you think about it, Jenny, with all the experience that you have, what do you think that winning, and I put air quotes around that for the listeners, means? And what does it cost people in the long term?
It's so funny that you even say that because I have literally had to scour for anything anyone in marketing has ever written for us and make winning be a taboo word. Because I always say there is no winning in divorce. There is no scoreboard, as you said, with sports, right? What does that look like? What does that mean? And so I try to reframe it as, are we getting a great solution? I do think sometimes there is some losing in divorce. I really do. And some of that by people not knowing how to present their evidence, some of them by not having the right lawyer, sometimes, frankly, being in front of the wrong judge. A lot of things that are out of anyone's control. But I don't think there's any true winning. Because like you said, this is human conflict, this is human emotion, this is human relationships. And there's no person running around keeping stats on who got what rebound or how many base hits somebody got or anything else. This is life. And so we're really trying to reframe it around, are we getting a great solution for our future? Are we getting one of the best solutions we could have for our future? And if so, then that is a victory, if you will, but I don't call it a win.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes that smart, well-intentioned people make early in the process that kind of land them in a bad place?
A lot of do-it-yourself. A lot of do-it-yourself agreements that then get signed and notarized, and in my state, that's a document. That's a binding contract. And you don't know what you don't know when you're representing yourself. And it is terribly more expensive on the back end to try to correct or fix these things or deal with what may have been omitted or anything else than it is just to hire the right lawyer to begin with and get the deal papered the way that it needs to be papered.
Yeah, and let's add to that artificial intelligence.
Yes, and I was going to say what we're seeing now, you and I are old enough that we remember Rocket Lawyer, right? But what we're seeing now is artificial intelligence. So two things with that. One, people using that in lieu of a lawyer for actual practical advice based upon your unique situation and the laws of your state. And we know that AI does wonderful things, but it also makes up law. And it provides fake citations. And we see this in our community of lawyers now, people getting fined by the judge, zinged by the judge, disbarred by the administrative agency that oversees us as lawyers. We see things happening because failure to oversee the AI stuff. And we know what we know as lawyers. And so someone without the experience that we have can really get duped in AI, I think. And the other thing is, people are now using AI to try to improve their communications, but yet I think it's making communication worse because you can still tell when it's AI, and then it feels very disassociated, not written by a human, and it will probably get better with time. But I would say relying upon AI and do it yourself, yes, are huge mistakes. And the other one is being ignorant about your assets and kind of putting your head in the sand about your assets. We have a lot of folks come to us and they don't know what they have. And they're like, well, I just trust what the other person says. And I'm all for trust. I love trust, but there are times when you need to protect yourself as well. And you need to do a little bit of a deep dig. And you may find out that the person is exactly right, and that's wonderful. But what if you don't? What if you don't dig, and then down the road, there's this huge asset that wasn't disclosed, and then that's a mess. So we're doing a lot of cleanup work around here lately, and I don't know why. I think people are trying to cut corners, honestly, in this economy we currently have. But I also think that AI is everywhere, and people are getting overly reliant upon it.
And one thing that I've seen with AI is that it gets the point wrong, right? Like the words all look right, and forget the false citations and all that sort of stuff. But if you don't understand the context in which you are drafting an agreement, you don't understand how the law works in your jurisdiction, right? And you don't understand how your priorities and your concerns fit into what's possible. And listen, creativity, we've done deals no court could never do. Many, many, many of them, hundreds, thousands of them, where people said, well, this is, I understand what would happen in court, but we want to stay in business together. We want to nest in the family residence. We want to do something the court's not going to order us to do. Can you help us do it? And yeah, lawyers are really good at doing that. And AI could sort of do that, except that they don't necessarily understand the priorities. And if you, the user of AI, don't understand what it is you're really trying to accomplish and how to do it, you're going to get something wrong. It's guaranteed, at least at this moment in time, that something will be off, something will be misstated, and which is fine so long as everything's fine. But when it's not fine and you have to actually rely on this agreement for a judge to enforce it, that's where you run into trouble.
Yes. And AI doesn't always know the nuances, right?
Well, that's exactly the point. It doesn't know.
If you don't feed it the nuances, and you don't know the nuances to feed it, what was the old mantra? Garbage in, garbage out?
Yeah.
That's what you're going to get. And even if you think you've thought through everything, there's probably still something you miss. Like we see all the time agreements that come through that say the parties agree the house will be sold and the proceeds will be divided. Well, that's all great, just like you said, when everything's fine. But what about when it's not fine? What am I supposed to do with that in court? Hi, Judge, the parties agree they're going to sell the house. Well, when, Miss Bradley, did they agree that they were going to list the house by? How did they agree they were going to divide the proceeds? What are they going to do with the expenses of the house? How did they even pick a realtor? Like, none of the meat is on the bones with a lot of the things that come out. And then the stuff that is coming out of AI, I don't mean to say this and it sounds as bad as it's going to come out, but in my head it sounds better. It's fluff. It's not substance, and it's not the actual meat that you need to have something that's enforceable when things do head south. If they do, and we hope they don't. We hope you write an agreement that you never need anything further from. But the reality is, you've done thousands, I've done thousands. There are 10% or so of these that you have to go back and do something about sometimes.
Totally. And if you do it right the first time, that reduces that percentage, right? So it's these ambiguous, I thought it meant this, but you thought it meant that, those kinds of things where you really get into trouble.
You could get away with the ambiguity, but there's still just a certain percentage of the population that sometimes doesn't want to end up doing what they agreed to. And that, I was lumping that into my 10% as well. You just have to go enforce it.
Yeah. They're just like, well, I didn't realize that was going to mean, blah, 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 whatever.
Yeah. Where I agreed to that 5 years ago, I can't do it now. Well, you should have thought about that 5 years ago. But anyway, I digress. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to come back to this idea of choosing a process that reduces conflict. And I can imagine that there are listeners out there thinking, well, conflict is unavoidable. This relationship is one filled with conflict. And so does that mean that they're doomed, maybe is the word that comes to mind, to having to go to court? Or is there some kind of productive conflict? And what would that look like?
I think conflict gets a bad rap, first of all, because Everybody says conflict, and I believe what they mean is more of the yelling, the screaming. We can't agree on what color the sky is. Somebody wants to fight just to fight. And nobody talks about the healthy side of conflict, which is when you actually can talk about what each person wants, maybe what each person needs, why they need it, so that you can begin to have an understanding about why this is important to them. And so this may sound a little woo-woo to some listeners that are out there, but the why that drives somebody, the motivation behind what you're seeing, is really important to know. Because then you can figure out what's really important to that person, and you can see that the fight that was about the house, that you thought all along was about the house, and why won't this person leave the house, is really about, I want my children to be able to finish high school here. And I'm afraid that if we sell the house, they're not going to be able to finish high school. And when you find out what's actually going on and driving some of the disagreement, then you can say, oh, well, is there another way we can accomplish this? Like you said, we lawyers can be very creative. A judge might say, well, you guys can't agree upon who should stay in the house, so let's just sell it. The end. Lawyers can say, okay, well, is there a solution that we can do? Is there something in the neighborhood that can be rented? Can we agree this person can stay in the house for 2 more years till high school's over? Whatever. And so I think that there is definitely unhealthy conflict out there in the world. There are people that try to use it for a power game, for manipulation, for scare tactics, for other things. But there is also just a layer of what's really going on here. And by asking curious questions, you can actually sometimes see that this really isn't a conflict after all, because, gosh, both sides would really love for the children to finish high school at this particular school.
They can't figure out a way to do it. And there's a lot of fear about that. And so once you sort of say, all right, we're willing to talk about the fear, we're willing to talk about the other things, well, maybe it's not just about the house. Maybe we can open up the whole rest of the negotiation and find a way to make it work, because whatever happens in that conversation reveals them. So I have 2 questions that I like to ask toward the end of the podcast, and one I call the reframe. So what is one belief that you think, Jenny Bradley, that people have about divorce that you wish they would completely rethink?
Oh, just one. So tough. I think that it is the concept that if I'm going to see a lawyer, that means I'm going to be in court.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one, because most lawyers, I don't even go to court anymore at all. I'm like, not doing that, after my own divorce. No, thank you. All right. And then the second question I call the surprise. And that is, after all the years that you've been doing this work, what still surprises you about how people go through divorce?
I am still surprised that so many folks going through divorce seem to still fight about what I'm going to call the personal property. It's 20-something years now that I've been doing divorce, for going on 28 this year. And people are still fighting about things that could be replaced for a lot cheaper at brand new value than they're paying 2 lawyers to fight about. And that still really, really, really surprises me, because I would have thought that as we got further along, and minimalism seems to be everywhere, and we're in more of a digital age now, and a lot of people are buying experiences instead of things, that would have tailed off, but it has not.
Do you think it's really about the things or something they represent?
I 100% think it's still about something it represents. So it shouldn't surprise me as much as it does, because it's usually about emotions or security or safety or comfort, but it still manifests in those little tangible things. How about you?
What surprises me still?
Mm-hmm.
It surprises me how people still yearn for the connection that they had with their spouse. And even having decided to divorce, even being divorced, they still so want to be seen, appreciated, and affirmed by that other person, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that that's not going to happen. Thank you for asking. So, Jenny, thank you so much for being my guest on Divorce Dialogues. It's been really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to your folks.
I have some further reflections after my conversation with Jenny Bradley about the conflict that people come to in divorce. And conflict is a natural part of life. We're drawn to conflict. It excites us. That we're biologically wired to, in some ways, be attracted or repelled by conflict. And we often think of conflict as being a bad thing. But conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict is a way where we work through differences. We work through differences of opinion. We work through difficult situations in order to get to a place on the other side. And the question is not about avoiding conflict, although conflict makes many of us uncomfortable. The point is to get through the conflict so that both sides, I'm going to put air quotes around that, all perspectives are heard and considered, and that a resolution is come to that considers the best of all of those things. Stephen Covey wrote a book called The Third Alternative, and it's a really great book that I recommend to the listeners. And in it, and I'm way oversimplifying, but in it he says that if you and I are willing to put on the table what is most important and most relevant to us about a situation in which we're in negotiation or in conflict about, then we are able to come together through that discourse, through that conversation, through that open and vulnerable sharing of our priorities. Together, we're able to come to this third alternative solution that is better for me than the solution I thought was ideal for me coming into the discussion, and better for you than the solution you thought was ideal for you coming into it. So that the third alternative that is only achievable through conflict, through negotiation, through discussion, and through sharing, that third alternative is far superior than my ideal outcome or your ideal outcome before we went through that conflict conversation. And I think that is a really valuable idea. And so then the question becomes not how do we avoid conflict, but how do we work through the conflict in the most productive way, particularly when our personal lives are on the table, our feelings about ourselves and our own identity, our financial security and our future, our productive future in the workplace or in the family home or in our school system and our communities and our religious communities, whatever it might be. And also, of course, for our children's sake, should we have them. Thank you so much for listening. If this conversation was helpful, share it with someone who might need it. And if you're navigating divorce yourself, you'll find more resources and episodes at miller-law.com. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.